Welcome to The Rest is Giant Robots, a conversation through the careers of writer Simon Furman and artist Andrew Wildman. Recollections and revelations about the highs and the lows as creatives in comics, books, games, film and TV.
Hi there, I'm Simon Furman, writer on Transformers, many other comics and TV animation projects.
And I'm Andrew Wildman, artist on Transformers and many other projects.
So I was thinking, where did we finish up last time? I think we got to you joining the team as an interior strip artist.
Yes, yeah.
And me maybe just about on the cusp of going freelance and leaving, my office job at Marvel.
Right. Yeah. Cool.
So, obviously there's a big auspicious moment in 1989 where I go for lunch with Bob Budiansky, writer of the American Transformers comic, and pretty much everything changes at that point. But before we get to that, maybe we just need to do a little bit more rewinding, because I think in the first one we skipped over the first 4 years of Transformers pretty quickly. There was a lot of stuff before even you joined the book, and some of that was my career trajectory through Marvel UK, which had its twists and turns as well. So initially I was hired to write Transformers stories on a freelance basis, and I had no idea whether that would be a little or a lot of work. But at around the same time as I was talking to Sheila Cranner about doing my first story, The Enemy Within, Ian Rimmer, who we've mentioned before, who was my editor on Scream over at IPC, he had joined Marvel as an editor, and he was working on Captain Britain Monthly, which was the continuation of Alan Davis's run on Captain Britain. So he needed, as he had on Scream, an assistant or sub-editor, and he reached out to me at the same time as, he'd introduced me to Sheila to say, would I like to come on board on staff as well? And obviously the job security of that versus freelance was considerable.
Yeah.
So I jumped at the chance, and again it got me back into that thing I'd loved at IPC of being behind the scenes on the comic as well, and getting to meet and talk to artists and other writers and letterers and colorists, or less colorists, but basically I just loved working. As much as I love writing the scripts, I love working on a comic on a day-to-day, month-to-month basis.
Yeah, it's always good to be in a studio as well. That's the thing about being freelance. It's quite a solitary existence, and I mean, you talk to people on the phone or whatever. There was no Zoom or internet or anything like that. But yeah, it's quite solitary being freelance. So working in a studio must have been awesome back then, back in the old days of comics, in a sweaty studio in London. Must have been fantastic.
Yeah, and it was slightly chaotic and anarchic and all the things I kind of wanted of Marvel. I had this vision of Marvel from reading Stan's soapboxes and bullpen bulletins in the American Marvel comics. And I just had this idea that, or rather hope, that the Marvel UK office would have that same vibe of people who love what they do, generally having a good time doing it, even with deadlines and pressures and everything else.
Yeah.
I thought there must be that community spirit.
Yeah, and beer at the end of the day, no doubt.
No doubt, yes. Yeah, that was pretty much the first order of business. Find out where the pubs are in Bayswater, which is where Marvel was based, in Redan Place in Bayswater, just around the corner from what had been Whiteley's department store. And there's a story of a crane I can recount as well as I go through. But they at the time they were restoring Whiteley's and turning it into from a department store into a shopping centre. But I'll get to that in a bit.
Shout out to local pub from back in the day, Simon. What was the drinking hole, watering hole then?
Well, the local pub was the Redan, which was literally on the corner of the road we were working in,
Oh.
and Bayswater Road. So, and there was another many times frequented place called Piers Wine Bar.
Mm.
And that was often where we would gather on a Friday night. So, I mean, there was definitely a social drinking culture there at Marvel that I'd really wanted. And like you say, freelance can be solitary. You are just sitting at your keyboard or your tablet, but yes, it was great to be in the milieu, as it were, of Marvel behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And I had high hopes that, even back then, that mingling with Marvel UK would at some point mean mingling with Marvel USA
Mm.
and possibly opening doors to work there. So, there were all those little aspirations that, eventually bore fruit. Not necessarily in the way I thought it would happen. So,
Okay.
so just rewinding back, I joined as Ian's assistant editor. Then Captain Britain Monthly was wound up reasonably quickly, within a few months. And Sheila Cranner was being moved to Doctor Who Monthly magazine. And Ian became the new editor on Transformers comic, probably around issue 28 or 29.
Mm.
I can't remember which, but I think it was about the time we also went to full color as opposed to part color black and white,
Mm.
which was how it had started. And, it was great. I learned a lot from Ian. I learned a lot from how to deal with, the pressures, the deadline pressures, how to, juggle the schedules and the getting the work out of people, and often that amounted to, as I think we touched on last time, inviting people to bring their artwork into the office
Mm.
and meet everybody. And there was a very social thing about the freelancers as well. It was, I struck up friendships very quickly with the likes of Barry Kitson and Jeff Senior that have endured to this day. So it was very much, I think the emphasis was on, we're one big happy family, one big team, and come in and socialize with us as well.
Mm.
So I learned a lot from Ian just about how to run I think a happy ship, if is the kind of term I'd use for Marvel UK back then.
So did you were like story when you had freelancers coming in, were kind of storylines and things discussed, out of hours or even in the office, or was it just meeting them and just getting to know them as people and maybe just like reviewing the artwork? Was it like
Yeah, some of it was like that. Some of it was a bit of both, really. I did try always to make it, a little bit work centric to start off with. So either it would be reviewing pages or it would be going through a script that they were going to be drawing, or a cover rough that I used to draw really badly and give to the artists.
I remember them well. They should be framed and you should have your own exhibition if you've still got them.
I wish I had. I think the only person who did have some still was Lee Sullivan, who kept pretty much everything.
Right.
But I mean, they were appallingly bad, but they generally got over the gist of what I wanted on the cover.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. It's always useful for an artist to kind of see what the editor's got in mind rather than just do it from kind of, not that we necessarily follow that, exactly, but yeah, it's always a help to see something visual.
And yeah, at the same time as I was, assistant editing on Transformers, I was also becoming the lead writer. I wasn't kick off with. There were other writers involved. James Hill was one of the main other ones. Mike Collins had written some stuff. So at the time, I was just quite content to be the alternating writer. But very quickly, as had happened on Scream, Ian would just see it was probably easier for me just to roll with the stories. And I was literally handing over across a desk plot outlines and next story arcs.
Mm.
And the process just became much more streamlined. And I think Ian saw that I had a kind of long-term grasp on where we were going with the stories and the realities. So when we get to something like Target 2006, that
Mm.
was a pretty much a kind of cross promotion with Hasbro UK. They had opened the door to us tail ending on their TV advertising. So
Mm.
when they released new toys like Galvatron and Ultra Magnus, the new leaders, we would have a chance to feature cover art and a mock-up of the cover on the tail end of the TV ad. So it was better editorially for Ian and I to be able to discuss what kind of story would dovetail with their toy releases and get all our ducks in a row with what they wanted, Hasbro UK, because it was gold dust to us being on the Transformers TV advertising.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. What were the? Can you remember what the kind of sales figures were? Because sales figures in comics have kind of changed drastically over the years. So what kind of numbers was Transformers doing back then?
Well, it was a steady climb, really. I mean, when Transformers started out, it may well have been very short-lived,
Yeah.
but I think the pickup on Transformers in general was very quick and dramatic. You know, the American series had only been meant to be 4 issues,
Mm.
but almost immediately they moved on to issue 5. I don't think there was much of a break. So I think it was fairly meteoric anyway, the interest. And then, yes, you know, especially with things like those TV spots, our sales figures shot up in those first 50 or so issues I was directly involved in,
Wow.
to the point where when we get to around the the animated movie is coming out, we're doing Target 2006 and Hasbro releasing the movie toys. It really shot up to, I think at some point it was over 200,000 copies a week,
Mm.
which by today's standards is staggering for a
Yeah.
comic.
Yeah, it is incredible.
I mean, these were pocket money price comics, you know, British comics just were, but even so, it was still kind of staggering. We were competing with the likes of 2000 AD at the time in terms of sales. And pretty rapidly, we and 2000 AD became the go-to route into comics for creators like yourself
Mm.
and many others. And it was almost like there were two tracks. You could either go the 2000 route, or occasionally you'd go the Marvel route and jump trains onto the 2000 route.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
so we had a fair turnover of artists in those early days. So artists like Barry Kitson, who started really on Transformers, although had done other stuff as well for Marvel UK. He'd done some Spider-Man work. I think he'd done some backups for Captain Britain Monthly. So he was an established artist already, but we gave him work on Transformers, and you know he was great. He turned his hand to those with ease, and it's not always an easy transition to robots, as you were mentioning last time. And
Mm.
as Jeff often says, it's, you know, not everybody wanted to draw robots from the outset.
Mm.
But, you know, Barry was a stalwart professional, but I think always Barry had his eye on moving to 2000 AD, getting work on Judge Dredd, and then on to the American side of things.
Yeah, yeah. I think that was the prize that we all had our eye on. I don't think anyone jumped into British comics with the intention of fully staying there. But
Yeah, and I think there were just more possibilities in America, more work to be had. So yeah, and we'd all grown up with superheroes, and I think we all wanted to get into that side of the business.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, we lost where there was a sort of natural attrition where we lost artists like Barry and Will Simpson, to a lesser extent, Jeff Anderson. He was prolific enough that he could work for both 2000 and us.
Mm.
But that was great in a way because it meant that we were continually looking for new artists. The weekly schedule meant that we needed more and more artists. Very rarely did we have the luxury of we can put an artist on a 4-week story or a 6-week story.
Mm.
So we needed a rolling number of 5 or 6 different artists. And that led us to artists like Dan Reed and Brian Hitch, and the next generation. Robin Smith came in over from 2000, funnily enough, to draw Transformers and pretty much hate every minute of it. But, he
Yes.
still did a great job. So, yeah, it was great. And of course, that's how you ended up joining us as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like I say, like I said last time, I wasn't particularly inspired by drawing robots, but I mean, I've had this question, when we've done conventions and stuff like that, people say, that they find it really hard to draw robots. I was doing a convention a couple of weeks ago, and there were some artists, like really top draw artists from DC Comics, and they were saying, they were kind of looking at what I was doing, and they was like, "Oh God, I could never draw robots. Like, how on earth do you do it?" I mean, I've just got used to it. I can do it in my sleep now, pretty much. But I think the advantage I realized from when I was first getting into comics, although I'd been to art college, the advantage of drawing Transformers is that you don't have to worry too much about musculature. Like when you're drawing superheroes, if you don't get the muscular anatomy right, it looks wrong. And some people are great at that, and probably don't like the thing with Transformers where you've got to be able to have your kind of varying perspectives on all the different parts of the body be right, so that the foreshortening looks right and all that kind of stuff. And also probably not the hardest thing, but one of the unique things about drawing Transformers is how you deal with any of the joints. So like the elbow joints, knee joints, shoulders, with all that clunky metal going on. How do you get enough movement in it before it starts all clunking into each other? But you have to use artistic license on that. But yeah, I think in the early days I enjoyed it for 2 reasons. One, because I didn't have to worry too much about musculature, which is something that I slowly got to grips with as my work was developing anyway on other stuff. But the joy of Transformers was having your approach to Transformers, which was like turning it into like a sci-fi movie. It wasn't a toy book. It was the scope of it was huge, and it was really nice to kind of play with that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, and it's funny, when you came in, we had all the animation turnarounds of the characters, getting back to what you were saying about how easy or difficult they were to draw. And these were streamlined versions of the characters
Yeah.
that we hadn't had originally. So our original clutch of artists, Mike Collins, Barry Kitson, Will Simpson, and so on, were working largely off the pack design, the pack art, and the toys themselves.
Yeah.
So they were having to be even more interpretive because some of the toys looked nothing like the robots. I mean, we had the Marvel series, the Marvel US series to look at as well for how they were drawing the characters.
Yeah.
But to rotate the characters wasn't always easy. And, when we get to Target 2006, we literally, between episodes, get the proper reference material from the movie and the animation series. So the first part, drawn by Jeff Anderson, shows Galvatron, Cyclonus, Scourge in their toy style modes, drawn from the pack art. And then literally the next episode, also drawn by Jeff Anderson, they're suddenly in their streamlined, animated turnaround forms, which we used from then on, having got that reference.
Did you write that into the story in as much as why their appearance had changed? I mean, they are Transformers, so they could change from clunky toy design to streamlined design, I guess.
No, we didn't. We literally just didn't address it, and it must have been very noticeable. But maybe for our target audience, not so much. But latterly, of course, everyone can just see that dividing line between the old reference and the new animation series reference really clearly.
Yeah, I mean, when I came on board, I don't know if it was straight away, but pretty soon, I'd got a tape of the animated movie. But there was also the Marvel Transformers universe book that had all had a lot of the designs in there. When did that appear? Because that's like a Bible for anyone doing Transformers at that time.
Yeah, that was later. I mean, again, we just didn't have that stuff originally. But yeah, I think probably somewhere after Target 2006, around then, these proper character stand-ups appeared that they then got inked up and colored up and became the Transformers universe book. So we had all Bob's bios in one place, all the character, vehicle and robot modes in one place, and life was so much easier than this stack of reference we used to have to send out to people. Worst part of the job was the compiling of the reference material and photocopying that. No nice putting together a nice zip file of imagery. It was at the photocopier machine and send it out to the artist.
Yeah, because as an artist, the biggest question when you're presented with a new character, if you haven't got a lot of material, is, but what does he look like from the back? Just, that's always the hard thing to do. If there's not much existing reference, it's like, wow, what am I going to do on the back,
Yeah, it got better, and easier for all of us all round. So going back to them days, what else was going on? One of the things that I loved particularly was we were starting to get visits from Marvel US staffers. So Jim Shooter, who was the editor-in-chief at Marvel at the time, came over and pretty much critiqued all our staff. I don't think we were doing it right in the Jim Shooter way, but that's okay. We were still distinctly chuffed to have Jim Shooter in our offices talking about our comics and sort of being aware of us. We had the distinct feeling that Marvel US weren't aware of what we were or what we were doing, that we were producing original material. Bob Budiansky has told me since that he had no idea there was a UK Transformers storyline happening that was being laced into what he was doing until quite a way in.
Wow.
And probably when Jim Shooter came back and said, Bob, you probably need to talk to these guys. They're doing a lot of Transformers stories as well.
Yeah.
And, Marvel US even reprinted that original Man of Iron story across two of their issues, presumably because there was a deadline crunch and they needed something to fill some issues.
Right.
So I think it helped them as well that they knew we were out there. And that was when I started having some communication with Bob about what was being planned in the future stories, how far he knew. And we started to get plots sent over from Marvel US to us. I got my first trip out to Marvel US, part of a strange negotiation with Marvel UK management. I hadn't been given a pay rise that year, and I was a bit unhappy about that, I guess. So I braved the managing director and aired my grievances. And he said, well, look, here's a trade-off. We'll pay for you to go out to Marvel US and on a sort of work trip, coordinating trip. And I was just fine, better than any pay rise that is.
Yeah.
Take it.
Was that the first time you'd been to America?
It was.
Wow.
It was indeed. First time in New York, first time in America, and obviously first time in the hallowed halls of Marvel.
I know.
I literally there was the bullpen, and it was everything I'd hoped it would be. And actually, Marvel was everything I hoped it would be, because there was that same camaraderie and team spirit there, and everyone mucking in. And I got to meet Don Daly. I got to meet many other editors out there. I got to meet Mark Grunwald and Bob Harris and many others who I would come to know very well over in the years to come. And it was a great one, and it was really cemented the friendship that has endured to this day with myself and Bob Budiansky. And that in turn will lead us back to where we started eventually. But this was my first interaction with Bob, and it really did grease many wheels in terms of, Bob sending us stuff, reference flowing, their plots flowing before they were ever drawn. So we started to be able to anticipate where they were going and where our stories could fit with that, which was really, really helpful.
Yeah. Did any of that thinking kind of go the other way? Were they sort of taking into account what you were doing, or were they maintaining that sort of, slightly higher up the chain view, and that you would you take notice of what they were doing and fit in, or was there any of it going the other way around?
There was certainly, we would talk more, but I think the thing with Bob and the US Transformers comic was he was far more under the gun of, here's the next bunch of toy releases. They have to go into this next storyline to marry up with the toy release schedule.
Yeah.
So Bob's focus was always on slightly clearing the decks so he could bring in the headmasters and target masters and pretenders and everything that followed. So Bob had the tougher job in many ways. We were free to indulge ourselves. We had our future cast from Target 2006 and Wanted, Galvatron, Dead or Alive. We'd started to get more flow to our stories that existed independently almost of what was happening in the American comic. We still had to be aware of it, but once we were dealing with the year 2005 or 6 as we called it, it really was, we were free to do what we wanted much more. So we had some freedom. They and Bob had their own trajectory, and really there wasn't much dovetailing. We just had to make sure we didn't clash at any point. But it definitely helped once we had that awareness, and Bob had that awareness of us, that we could just work together easily. And like I say, this will all come together when Bob and I meet up in London in 1989. But there's more. Obviously, our artist roster is still changing. Dan Reed, who was an American guy living in Paris at the time, sent us samples. And although it was kind of wacky artwork, we just thought, yeah, he can really draw. He really is an interesting looking, and we didn't mind different. Most of our Transformers artists were quite noticeably different in style. So we adopted Dan. Possibly it led to one of my most harrowing incidents, which was when he was running kind of late on one story, and he told me he would bring the artwork over from Paris. came over, no Dan, no artwork. So finally, we get a phone call from him. Again, it was those days,
Yeah.
just to say that he'd been bounced back at customs because he didn't have enough funds on him.
Oh God.
And and one of the pages had gone missing
Oh,
somewhere in the
Jesus.
customs office. And, apparently, my expression was appalling because I just thought, oh God, this is the end of my career. We're looking at blank pages. But anyway, Dan, bless him, redrew the page and FedExed it to us, and we just about made it in terms of our deadline. But yeah, there was some scary deadline moments in there.
Yeah, I mean, back in the days of artwork being posted, pre-uploading it anywhere or, emailing it, whatever, just didn't exist. So posting stuff around, it makes you wonder, in the grand scheme of things, what percentage of artwork went missing when you consider how much artwork for, Marvel, DC, all those companies was being shipped around. I don't think I ever had anything go missing, but it's God, yeah. The
Yeah, I
sense
mean,
of
it
jeopardy.
must have happened.
Yeah,
And I think that's why a lot of the artists chose to come into the office, chose to, bring their 11 pages in with them.
yeah,
Right down to Jeff Senior, who lived up in Cumbria. He still thought, I'd rather get on the train with my artwork, come in, have some drinks with the crew,
yeah,
and then I absolutely know those pages have arrived.
yeah. I mean, obviously, we all have complete faith in our wonderful Royal Mail. Other couriers are available, but yeah, you never know. I mean, as an artist, the work is precious until it's handed over. It's your baby, so you want to deliver it by hand. But also, as an artist going into the offices in London had a double advantage. I mean, obviously, not just meeting all you wonderful people in the offices, but taking the art in and dropping it off was great because it's fully delivered. You hope that there's not any sucking of teeth while they're looking at it and saying, "Oh, you maybe should have done this." But also it was an opportunity to pick up any artwork from off of the shelves that had been published and was then just taking up space in the offices. So I remember the joy of seeing some of my artwork again when I picked it up and then took it home and many years later sold.
And of course, it would have been lettered up and
Yeah,
logoed and everything,
yeah, all of that. Yeah, that
which
was all stuck on. No digital, sorcery going on in those days.
no, I mean, I miss very much the tangible artwork and lettered artwork and, you know, bits with the Transformers logo where it's obviously been stripped off to be reused and things. So, yeah, I miss that hands-on nature of it all.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. None of it's real anymore. None of it's real anymore. It's all just exists in some fictitious cloud somewhere.
Indeed. But there are still more twists and turns before we get to 1989. And one of these was that while I was assistant editor on Transformers, I aspired to be a full editor, and that probably wasn't going to happen on Transformers. So when Marvel launched their Thundercats comic, I petitioned to be the editor on that and got the job,
Oh,
which was great. I thought, oh, great, my first full editorship, and I threw myself into making Thundercats look as good as possible, and that was great fun. The first time I'd had the full reins really, and obviously I'd learnt from Ian, and I still had Ian in the next room for advice, and but I had the connections, I had the artists. I got Lee Sullivan to do the cover art for the first issue,
mm,
and it was things like arranging free gifts. The first issues, or possibly more, always carried free gifts back in those days,
yeah.
and that was a thing you had to work out. There was a unit cost to a free gift, so it had to be worthwhile and yet not hideously expensive
Mm,
and just sort of make the comic unviable. So there was a lot to consider being an editor as opposed to just being an assistant editor.
yeah.
But as as it turned out, I managed something like 5 issues on Thundercats before I was reintroduced into the Transformers office as the editor, because Ian unexpectedly decided to leave staff and go freelance.
Ah,
And pretty much, and this is again going to pay into the later Bob Budiansky story, no one else really understood Transformers. No one else on staff had enough knowledge to take over, or even to import somebody new in.
mm,
There really was such a backlog by then of of knowledge that really I was the only candidate for the job. So while I was happy to be editor of Transformers, I was slightly aggrieved that I wouldn't get to see Thundercats through to 15, 20, 50 issues.
yeah.
But that was it. And suddenly I was editor of Transformers, and yeah, that was pretty much where I stayed until I left staff in '89.
Wow. Yeah. And as they say, the rest is giant robots.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
it's those sliding doors moments, isn't it? It's just like when you think about where we are now and how just those little, I don't know, bits of circumstance or the needs of other people or whatever schedules created, all that has come since then. I mean, if you'd have stayed on Thundercats, you'd done a great job. You probably would have ended up at Marvel US doing a superhero book or whatever, but then the world wouldn't have Transformers the way it is now, given the influence that, as we know, the influence that UK creators have had on the whole Transformers universe. So, yeah, amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And there were other sort of strange things to being editor on Transformers and writer, because basically Marvel, one of the main things of Marvel US was editors could not write for their own books. Editors wrote for other books, but an editor could not write for their own book. But again, we were in that catch-22 situation where I was both the best candidate for the editor job and the writing job. So we had to work out a system whereby Richard Starkings would be my de facto editor. He was by then group editor of the boys' titles there, or the that age group of titles,
Mm.
and he became my de facto editor. I would send him all my scripts, and he'd send them back scrawled with red notes and occasionally scathing comments about lifting, or rather homaging, certain things. I remember there was one particular episode of Space Pirates wherein I mirrored a scene from Batman the Killing Joke. In it, Ultra Magnus and Soundwave are having a post-battle tete-a-tete where they discuss the possibility of ending hostilities and working together, and ultimately how it couldn't possibly work, which is basically the end of The Killing Joke, where Batman and the Joker have pretty much the same conversation. The artist on that episode was Lee Sullivan, and he took that page as reference and shot every panel from the exact same angles.
Right.
For example, there's one panel where Batman's shadow falls on the Joker's face, and Lee substituted the bat ears for Ultra Magnus's antennae. Honestly, once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Oh man. I'm not surprised that Richard got slightly concerned about how far you were pushing homage. Yeah.
But those were the things we used to love to drop in, little references and things that we knew our audience wouldn't get, but any adult, any parent looking at the time would go, "Oh, I get that." Or we'd use I was infamous for using titles from the music I loved at the time. So there's a lot of spoof titles that are jam songs or Clash songs in my writing in those days, aware to nobody except myself.
Yeah. So you're chuckling to yourself knowingly. But hey, now it makes good podcast material to reveal all of that.
Exactly. So here we are in '89, and you're on board. Obviously, you're now one of our stable of cover artists and interior artists,
Yeah.
and even that was a slightly bumpy start. I hope you don't mind me reminding you that.
Was it, Simon? What was that all about then?
Well, your first story for us was the Christmas story. I think 199 oh, hang on, what do I want to talk about? 1988 Christmas story
Right.
called Cold Comfort and Joy.
Yeah.
And I'd seen lots of your art on the other things you'd been doing for us.
Mm.
And when you brought the pages in, the penciled pages, I was slightly underwhelmed. I felt slightly like there was a lot more that could be done with them. A lot of I think there just wasn't enough as the detail I'd seen in your other work.
Right.
And uh, I think we had, because we were tight for time, I think we had Stephen Baskerville more or less ink and draw in some extra backgrounds.
Outrageous.
And but your next job, which was the next issue, the first part of Time Wars, was just blisteringly good. And it was just such a, it was one of those ones where I think the somewhat sort of harsh editorial word really helped, and you sort of just upped your game to what I kind of knew you could do anyway.
Yeah, I mean, as I kind of remember that. So yeah, so Cold Comfort and Joy, the Christmas it was Cold Comfort and Joy, wasn't it? The Christmas
Yes.
issue came in. So at that time, just to sort of place it in what was going on for me at that time, was we had just, myself and Leslie, my wife, and the kids had just moved house. We had been living in Nottingham, where I'd been working as a graphic designer. We'd moved down to Bedfordshire, and we'd bought a house that needed a lot of work doing to it, and we'd got the builders in, and they were like ripping the plaster off the walls, and we had to have a damp course put into it and all that kind of stuff. So as a family, we had to decamp to my mum's house, which was about 20 miles away. And so all the work I was doing, I was sitting in their tiny little spare bedroom, sort of half set up with the gear that I'd got, sort of drawing these pages. So, maybe I was slightly distracted, but I honestly thought I'd done done a good job. There were, I do remember putting lots of little, like you were saying about you using references to other things, like putting in, song titles in your stories and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I love all of that kind of stuff, all those little Easter eggs. So I was dropping Easter eggs into stuff. I was referencing It's a Wonderful Life, the classic movie, the James Stewart movie.
Yeah.
So there were little nods to that in there. I don't know why I necessarily thought of that, just because it was Christmas, I suppose. But I was staying at my mum's in Bedford, and It's a Wonderful Life is set in a place called Bedford Falls. And I don't know. So I was kind of playing with that. Maybe I was too distracted with being too darn clever for my own good. So I turned in this job, and I thought it was okay. And then, yeah, I remember having that phone call. And you saying about, well, this, that, and the other, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, what the hell? Am I going to have to do this again? What's going on? I've got enough going on in my life. But, I'd kind of listened calmly. And then the killer line that you delivered to me was, well, I suppose we can get Baskerville to save it. Which was like, right, F you, I'm gonna kind of attack this one again. And so I added some more detail, and then but Stephen Baskerville, bless him, did what Stephen does best, which is just really get into the detail. So he certainly added more than he always has. He's always added a lot more than I've ever drawn, whether I want him to or not, but he just loves it. He just so loved those old techniques of literally using ink and pens and brushes on artboard. And he did a bang up job, and I think it turned out really well. And I think seeing then what he did And having heard all of your, well-meant criticisms, I decided to, do something different for the next one.
Well, apparently in the office, I was infamous for my phone calls to artists, where I would spend the first 5 minutes going through everything I liked and general praise, and then there would be a but.
Yeah.
And people in the office used to sort of grimace at that point as I then launched into whatever was they needed to change or I didn't like. And anyway, that was a part of the job of being an editor, and generally it all worked out well. I've got to say, though, that excuse is one of the better ones I've heard. We had a little book of artist excuses, cat ate my homework style excuses. So, but that was a particularly good one. So anyway.
Yeah, well, I mean, at the end of the day, it's a business, isn't it? It's got to get done, and it's got to get done on time. So, and I took that on because I wasn't straight in as a freelance artist. I had worked in a professional studio meeting deadlines, but it's a key discipline when you work in in any industry, and in the creative industries especially. You've got to get it done. You've got to get it done on time. And then inside of that, you do the best you possibly can.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess we should really get to 1989 and the next big thing, but we've run out of time. It's gonna have to be next time. I'm sorry, guys. The unintentional cliffhanger here, but the meeting with Bob Budiansky in 1989, you're just going to have to wait for the next episode.
The meeting that changed history. Yeah. So you're sorry, not sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and here we are. So I think we've covered a lot this time, but join us next time for that infamous or famous meeting between me and Bob.
Wow. Okay. See you soon.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to The Rest is Giant Robots. If you enjoyed what you heard, please consider subscribing for more and maybe share with like-minded friends. This has been a Wildfur production.